Imagine you're starting your day. You reach for your phone, arrange for a coffee delivery using an app, and settle the cost with a simple contactless payment. $6 vanishes from your bank account instantaneously. But what truly transpired in that fleeting moment? Your bank didn't physically dispatch $6 in currency. Likewise, the cafe didn't receive $6 as tangible cash. Instead, your bank dispatched an electronic directive to the cafe's financial institution, essentially stating, decrement this account by $6. Increment that account by $6. No actual money changed hands. It was merely a matter of digits being altered within two distinct databases. That $6 possesses no physical form. It exists solely as a digital notation, representing a debt conjured by a bank, supported by nothing more than our collective faith in the financial architecture. Now, let's rewind the clock to the year 1825. Picture the identical transaction, but within an entirely different framework. You step into a coffee house and place your order. Reaching into your pocket, you retrieve a silver coin. This coin is precisely 0.77 ounces of pure silver. You present it to the proprietor. He might even give it a little bite to confirm its authenticity, assess its weight, and then accept it. Your payment was made with actual tangible metal possessing inherent value. Should the government cease to exist tomorrow, that silver coin would retain its worth, because silver serves practical purposes in crafting jewelry, producing mirrors, and facilitating electrical conductivity. The transaction involved the direct physical conveyance of valuable metal from your possession to his. These two scenarios, separated by a span of 2 centuries, illuminate the fundamental divergence between the economic systems of the past and the present. The legacy economy was anchored in tangible assets: gold, silver, land, and physical commodities. The contemporary economy, conversely, is founded upon debt, trust, numerical entries, and computing power. Grasping this distinction is crucial, as it elucidates why your grandparents might have purchased a home for $15,000, while today you find yourself unable to afford a similar dwelling at $450,000, despite the structure remaining the same. Please understand, this is not financial counsel. It is an educational exploration of how our economic mechanisms operate, how they once functioned, and why the evolution from the former system to the latter has shaped the financial landscape you navigate today. Allow me to meticulously detail the workings of the prior economic model, delineate the shifts that led to the modern system's operation, and outline the implications for your personal financial trajectory. The historical economic order, which prevailed for millennia until approximately 1971, was governed by 3 core tenets. Firstly, money served as a reliable store of value, retaining its worth over extended periods. Secondly, currency was intrinsically backed by a tangible asset, most commonly gold or silver. Thirdly, economic expansion was inherently constrained by physical limitations, as the creation of money from thin air was not feasible. Let's begin by examining the operation of currency within that older framework. For the vast majority of human existence, money took the form of commodity money. This implies that the money itself possessed intrinsic value. A gold coin was valuable because it was gold. A silver coin was valuable because it was silver. Even in the event of the issuing government's collapse, the inherent worth of the metal persisted. This stands in stark contrast to today, where a dollar bill derives its value solely from the government's declaration of its legal tender status and the populace's trust in that decree. In antiquity, the Roman denarius was a silver coin containing roughly 3.9 grams of pure silver. A Roman legionary's annual stipend was 225 denarii. This silver possessed genuine worth. It could be melted down for ornamental purposes or exchanged for goods with any individual who valued silver. The Roman state could dilute the currency's value by reducing its silver content, a practice they did indeed employ. But they could not conjure value ex nihilo. Their requirement was to mine silver, strike coins, and then distribute them. The creation of money was circumscribed by the volume of precious metal that could be extracted from the earth. This paradigm endured for millennia, albeit with variations. Medieval Europe relied on gold and silver coinage. The Byzantine solidus, a gold coin, maintained its weight and purity for an impressive 7 centuries, establishing itself as the preeminent currency across the Mediterranean. Chinese dynasties utilized bronze, silver, and gold coins, and later pioneered paper currency, which was backed by reserves of precious metals. The Islamic world employed gold dinars and silver dirhams, adhering to stringent Quranic principles concerning monetary purity. The underlying principle remained constant. Genuine currency required backing by an asset of tangible value. This imposed natural restraints on economic expansion. If a monarch desired to erect a grand palace, he needed gold reserves in his treasury. Lacking gold, he had 3 avenues: levy taxes upon his subjects, an unpopular measure limited by their capacity to pay; conquer neighboring territories and seize their gold; or mine additional gold, a process that was both slow and costly. He could not simply print more money, as paper currency either did not yet exist or was explicitly tied to metal reserves. This system fostered price stability over extended durations. In England, the price of wheat in 1300 hovered around 5 shillings per quarter. By 1700, 4 centuries later, wheat cost approximately 6 shillings per quarter. Prices fluctuated annually due to harvests, conflicts, and epidemics. However, there was no systematic long-term inflation, as the money supply expanded gradually, restricted by the availability of precious metals. Now consider the present day. From 1913, when the Federal Reserve was established, to 2024, the purchasing power of the United States dollar has diminished by 97%. A dollar in 1913 could acquire what $31 can purchase today. This decline is not attributable to a scarcity of goods, but rather to a fundamental alteration in the very nature of money. The transition from the older economic model to the contemporary one occurred in phases over approximately 150 years, but the pivotal juncture was 1971. Allow me to guide you through this transition. During the 19th century, most major economies operated under a gold standard. This meant that paper currency could be directly exchanged for gold at a fixed rate. If you possessed a $20 bill, you could enter a bank and request a 1-ounce gold coin. The institution was legally obligated to provide it. This linkage between paper money and physical metal restricted the amount of currency governments could issue. The gold standard fostered international financial equilibrium. If the British pound was valued at $4.86 per ounce of gold, and the United States dollar at $20 per ounce of gold, the exchange rate between pounds and dollars was mathematically fixed at $4.12 per pound. Nations could not manipulate exchange rates to gain trade advantages, as the metal ratios represented immutable physical constants. However, the gold standard presented a challenge. It curtailed governmental expenditure. Upon the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, European governments faced the immediate necessity of allocating immense resources for troop mobilization and arms production. Their gold reserves proved insufficient. Consequently, they resorted to the predictable action governments take when constrained by sound monetary principles. They circumvented the rules. Britain, France, Germany, and Russia all suspended gold convertibility, effectively barring citizens from exchanging paper money for gold. This empowered governments to print currency to finance their war efforts. Following the conflict, most nations endeavored to reinstate the gold standard, but the damage was already inflicted. The precedent had been established that gold convertibility was a dispensable option during times of crisis. The Great Depression of the 1930s further eroded the gold standard's integrity. In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt enacted legislation prohibiting American citizens from owning gold. The government confiscated gold at $20.67 per ounce, only to immediately revalue it at $35 per ounce, thereby effectively confiscating 41% of gold owners' wealth. The rationale? Restricting the money supply to gold reserves impeded the government's ability to inflate the currency as a countermeasure against deflation. Gold represented an impediment to monetary manipulation and therefore had to be eliminated. Post the Second World War, the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement introduced a modified gold standard. The United States dollar was pegged to gold at $35 per ounce. All other currencies were pegged to the dollar. Foreign governments could exchange dollars for gold, but private citizens were precluded from doing so. This established the dollar as the global reserve currency while maintaining a tenuous connection to gold. This arrangement persisted until the 1960s, when the United States began experiencing persistent trade imbalances and resorted to printing dollars to finance the Vietnam War and domestic social programs. Foreign governments, particularly France, observed that the United States was issuing more dollars than it possessed gold to back them. France famously dispatched naval vessels to New York to retrieve gold from Fort Knox, converting dollars into gold at an accelerated pace. By 1971, the United States' gold reserves had dwindled from 20,000 tons in 1945 to 8,000 tons. The U.S. had printed such an excessive quantity of dollars that it could no longer fulfill redemption obligations. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would temporarily suspend gold convertibility. That temporary suspension ultimately became permanent. The gold standard effectively ceased to exist, giving rise to the modern monetary system. What emerged after 1971 was an entirely novel economic paradigm predicated on fiat currency. Fiat is a Latin term signifying "let it be done." Fiat currency is money that derives its value from a government's decree and the populace's trust in that declaration. A dollar bill is worth $1 because the inscription states, "This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private." That is the sole basis. There is no gold. There is no silver. It is purely a matter of governmental mandate and collective belief. This fundamentally reshaped economic operations by eliminating all constraints on money creation. Under the gold standard, if a government wished to generate $1 million, it required $1 million worth of gold. With fiat currency, if a government desires to create $1 million, it simply inputs digits into a computer. Money is now generated by governmental decree, supported by nothing more than confidence in the government's capacity to tax and enforce its will. However, fiat currency alone does not encapsulate the complete picture of the contemporary economy. The modern economy is also a debt-based economy, a concept that is even more revolutionary. Let me elucidate how money is actually generated within the current system, as this will fundamentally alter your understanding of the economy. Within the prevailing banking system, the majority of money is not created by the government. It is generated by private banks through the act of lending. This process is known as fractional reserve banking, and it operates as follows. You deposit $1,000 into your checking account. The bank does not physically store your $1,000 in a vault. Instead, the bank retains perhaps $100 as reserves and lends out $900 to another individual. That borrower now possesses $900, yet you still have $1,000 reflected in your account. The bank lists your balance as $1,000, and you are theoretically able to withdraw it at any time. Herein lies the marvel. The money supply has just expanded. This cycle then repeats. The borrower expends the $900, which is then deposited into another bank. That bank retains a portion as reserves, say $90, and lends out the remaining $810. Consequently, there is now $1,000 in the initial account, $900 in the second account, and $810 in the third account. This is the mechanism by which the majority of money is generated in the contemporary economy. Approximately 97% of money exists as bank credit, created through loans, rather than physical currency printed by the government. When you secure a mortgage for $300,000, the bank does not hand you $300,000 in cash. Instead, the bank creates a new deposit in the seller's account by entering digits into a computer. That $300,000 did not exist prior to your loan origination. The bank created it, and you now owe the bank $300,000, plus accrued interest. This system carries profound implications. Firstly, the money supply can expand limitlessly, provided banks continue to lend. There are no physical constraints such as gold reserves. Secondly, the entire money supply is essentially debt. For every dollar that exists, someone is obligated to repay that dollar, plus interest to a bank. Thirdly, if everyone attempted to discharge all outstanding debts simultaneously, the money supply would contract precipitously. as money is created through lending and extinguished through repayment. This is why the contemporary economy necessitates perpetual growth. If lending activity ceases, the money supply shrinks. If the money supply contracts, consumer spending diminishes. If consumer spending decreases, businesses falter, individuals lose their livelihoods, and the economy experiences a collapse. The system is intrinsically designed for continuous expansion. Stagnation equates to crisis. Compare this to the economic model of the past. In 1825, if you sought a loan to acquire land, you would approach a wealthy landowner or merchant who possessed actual savings. That individual would have accumulated gold or silver coins over years of diligent saving. He might lend you 100 gold coins. You would then purchase the land and, over time, repay 110 gold coins, with the additional 10 representing interest. In this scenario, the money already existed. The loan merely facilitated the transfer of existing funds from lender to borrower. Money was not generated by the loan itself. In the modern economy, when you receive a loan, the funds are created at the precise moment of lending. They did not exist previously. This creation is predicated on your promise to repay, which is ultimately underpinned by your future labor. Essentially, contemporary money is backed by the productive capacity of borrowers to work and generate income sufficient for loan repayment. This system functions effectively as long as the economy continues to grow. If economic expansion falters, borrowers are unable to repay, banks face insolvency, and the entire system collapses. This leads to the third fundamental distinction between historical and contemporary economies. The legacy economy was founded on production and savings. The modern economy is driven by consumption and debt. In the prior economic era, growth stemmed from augmented production. This meant cultivating more wheat, extracting more silver, constructing more vessels, or manufacturing more textiles. Wealth was generated through the creation of tangible goods, and investment was financed by savings. If a merchant aimed to expand his enterprise, he would diligently save gold coins over several years, subsequently utilizing those savings to acquire equipment or hire additional workers. Savings served as the source of investment capital. In the present-day economy, economic growth is propelled by increased consumption. Gross domestic product, GDP, the metric for economic output, is calculated as consumption plus investment plus government expenditure plus net exports. Consumption constitutes approximately 70% of U.S. GDP. This signifies that the economy expands when individuals purchase more goods, even if those purchases are financed by borrowed funds they do not presently possess. Should consumer spending decline, GDP will decrease and the economy will enter a recession. This creates a paradoxical incentive. Governments and media outlets incessantly encourage spending, not saving. Consumer confidence is lauded when it rises, indicating a greater willingness among individuals to borrow and spend. Saving, in fact, is detrimental to GDP in the short term, as money saved is money not spent, which reduces consumption, thereby lowering GDP. This stands in stark opposition to the old economy, where frugality was esteemed and excessive spending was discouraged. The modern economy also relies heavily on consumer debt to fuel its expansion. Credit cards were non-existent in the historical economic context. In 1950, consumer credit card debt was virtually nil. By 2024, Americans owe $1.17 trillion in credit card debt, with an average interest rate of 22%. This debt finances consumption that directly contributes to GDP. Without consumer debt, consumption would diminish, GDP would contract, and the economy would falter. Auto loans, another innovation of the modern era, total $1.63 trillion, all outstanding. Student loans amount to $1.77 trillion. Mortgages aggregate $12.5 trillion. The total household debt exceeds $17.9 trillion. All this debt finances consumption and asset acquisitions that sustain economic growth. However, this also renders households more vulnerable. In the preceding economic era, a family experiencing income loss could curtail spending and subsist on their savings. In the contemporary economy, a family facing a reduction in income risks defaulting on their debts, losing assets, and encountering financial ruin due to a lack of savings and substantial obligations. Now, allow me to illustrate how global supply chains differentiate the modern economy from its predecessor, as this represents one of the most profound divergences. Within the legacy economy, production was predominantly local. If you resided in an English village in 1825, virtually everything you consumed was produced within a 50-mile radius. Your sustenance originated from local farms. Your garments were fashioned by local weavers using locally sourced wool. Your furniture was crafted by local carpenters employing local timber. Your tools were forged by the village blacksmith. Trade did exist for luxury items like spices, silk, and precious metals. However, everyday necessities were produced domestically. This fostered resilience. If trade routes were disrupted by war or adverse weather, your village could still subsist as it produced its own food and essential goods. The economy was decentralized, with thousands of villages and towns operating with a degree of semi-autonomy. A crisis in one region did not precipitate a global cascade. The modern economy operates in the inverse fashion. Production is globalized while consumption remains local. The supply chain for a single product can span multiple continents. Permit me to offer a concrete illustration. An iPhone, one of history's most successful products, is designed in California. Yet 0% of its manufacturing occurs within the United States. The iPhone's supply chain involves over 200 suppliers spread across 40 countries. The processor is designed by Apple in California, fabricated by TSMC in Taiwan, using machinery from the Netherlands, and programmed with software developed in the US. The display is produced in South Korea by Samsung or LG. The battery is manufactured in China, utilizing lithium from Australia, cobalt from the Congo, and rare earth elements from China. The camera lens originates from Japan. The aluminum casing is manufactured in China from bauxite mined in Guinea. The final assembly takes place in China at Foxconn factories, employing hundreds of thousands of workers. This iPhone is then transported to the United States on container ships, unloaded at the port of Los Angeles, conveyed by truck to distribution centers, and finally delivered to Apple stores, where Americans purchase them using credit cards that generate money through bank lending. The entire process engages dozens of nations, thousands of corporations, and millions of individuals, none of whom are responsible for producing the complete item. This global supply chain yields remarkable efficiency and affordability. An iPhone priced at $200 would cost $3,000 if manufactured entirely within the United States, owing to the higher cost of American labor. Global supply chains permit companies to optimize every component, sourcing from wherever production costs are minimized. This explains the current affordability of consumer goods compared to 50 years ago. However, global supply chains also introduce fragility. If a single link in the chain breaks, the entire network is compromised. During the COVID-19 pandemic, when Chinese factories ceased operations, the global economy experienced a standstill. Shortages emerged across a vast array of products, from semiconductors to furniture to automotive parts. The just-in-time inventory system, designed to minimize costs by maintaining minimal excess stock, left no buffer when supply was disrupted. The old economy was characterized by inefficiency but possessed resilience. The modern economy is efficient but inherently fragile. This fragility is escalating as supply chains become increasingly intricate and concentrated. Another fundamental distinction lies in the role of central banks. In the legacy economy, central banks were virtually non-existent. The Bank of England, established in 1694, was an anomaly. Most countries did not possess central banks until the 20th century. The Federal Reserve was not created until 1913, and central banks in the historical economic system wielded limited authority, as they were constrained by gold reserves. In the contemporary economy, central banks stand as the most formidable institutions within the financial system. The Federal Reserve dictates interest rates, the money supply, and ensures financial stability for the entire U.S. economy. When the Fed reduces interest rates, borrowing becomes less expensive, banks increase lending, the money supply expands, and the economy grows. Conversely, when the Fed raises interest rates, borrowing becomes costlier, lending slows, the money supply contracts, and the economy decelerates. The Fed also engages in quantitative easing, a term that essentially signifies money printing. When the economy faces a crisis, the Fed generates new money and utilizes it to acquire government bonds and mortgage-backed securities, thereby injecting funds directly into the financial system. Between 2008 and 2022, the Fed created approximately $9 trillion through quantitative easing. This money had no prior existence. The Fed simply entered digits into a computer and purchased assets, thereby creating new currency unsupported by any underlying asset. This level of power was absent in the old economy. Central banks could not simply print gold. If the economy encountered a crisis under a gold standard, the prescribed remedy was to allow inefficient businesses to fail, permit prices to decline, and await a natural economic recovery. This process, while painful, was self-correcting. In today's economic landscape, the Federal Reserve's approach of injecting currency aims to mitigate immediate hardships. Yet this strategy engenders enduring repercussions such as escalating prices and inflated asset valuations. A further significant divergence lies in financialization. The former economic era was characterized by the dominance of tangible production-oriented enterprises. Prosperity stemmed from the ownership of agricultural lands, manufacturing facilities, maritime vessels, and trade commodities. While financial activities existed, they occupied a subordinate role to the actual creation of goods and services. The contemporary economy, however, is largely dictated by financial markets. The financial sector, encompassing banking institutions, insurance providers, investment firms, and real estate enterprises, constitutes roughly 21% of the United States' gross domestic product and oversees an aggregate of over $100 trillion in global assets. Finance has supplanted manufacturing in scale. A greater volume of wealth is now generated through ingenious financial maneuvers, the repositioning of capital between various accounts, rather than through the production of physical items. This paradigm shift carries profound implications. In 1965, the average chief executive officer of a major corporation earned 20 times the remuneration of the average employee. By 2024, this disparity has widened dramatically, with the average CEO now commanding 344 times the salary of a typical worker. This astonishing surge in top executive compensation is primarily attributable to stock options and financial incentives directly linked to stock market performance, not to the enhancement of product quality. Chief executive officers are rewarded for augmenting shareholder value, a purely financial metric, rather than for improving their offerings or better serving their clientele. Similarly, wealth disparity has proliferated within the modern economic framework. In 1970, the wealthiest 1% of the population held 23% of the United States' total wealth. By 2024, this same cohort now possesses 32% of the nation's wealth. This trend is not a consequence of increased productivity by the affluent. Instead, it is driven by the fact that the wealthy own financial assets, such as stocks and properties, which appreciate in value as central banks inject more currency into circulation. Conversely, individuals with lower and middle incomes primarily possess their labor and savings, which diminish in real worth due to inflationary pressures stemming from currency printing. Allow me to illustrate this intricate connection with a tangible scenario, demonstrating how these distinctions impact ordinary individuals. Envision two individuals, separated by a century, attempting to acquire a dwelling. In 1925, a skilled laborer's annual earnings approximated $500. In 2025, a comparable skilled worker's income is around $75,000. The rationale behind this disparity lies in the economic underpinnings of each era. In 1925, the economy operated on principles of sound currency, restricted credit access, and localized manufacturing. Residences were constructed using local resources, materials, and labor, thereby maintaining cost efficiencies. Credit availability was limited, necessitating substantial down payments from purchasers and encouraging prompt repayment. Currency retained its intrinsic value, making saving a financially prudent endeavor. In contrast, the economy of 2025 functions on a fiat currency system, characterized by unrestrained credit and inflated asset values. Dwellings now cost approximately 6 times an individual's income, a consequence of accommodative monetary policies and readily available credit, which empower buyers to take on larger loans, subsequently inflating prices. The cost of construction materials has escalated due to complex global supply chains and energy expenses. Furthermore, the value of currency continuously erodes through inflation, penalizing savers while benefiting those who incur debt. The contemporary worker finds themselves in a precarious situation. Wage increases have not kept pace with asset price inflation, as labor compensation growth is constrained by competition and productivity limitations. However, asset values escalate in tandem with central bank currency injections. Housing affordability erodes not due to a scarcity of properties, but rather because an excess of credit fuels bidding wars that drive up prices. This situation exposes a fundamental reality of the current economic system. It is structured to favor those who possess assets and comprehend the mechanisms of currency creation, while simultaneously exploiting individuals who solely offer their labor and rely on savings in currency. If you hold equities and real estate, you benefit when the Federal Reserve expands the money supply as asset prices inflate. If your income derives solely from wages and your savings are held in dollars, you experience a decline in your purchasing power. Consequently, what does this signify for you personally? How can one effectively navigate an economy that operates on principles fundamentally divergent from those of the past? Firstly, it is imperative to recognize that accumulating savings in fiat currency represents a losing proposition within a fiat monetary system. Your dollars erode in purchasing power by 3 to 7% annually due to inflation. Over a span of 30 years, this amounts to a 60% devaluation. Your grandparents could preserve their wealth by simply depositing funds in a bank account. This is no longer a viable strategy. You must engage in investments that appreciate in value, commensurate with inflation. Otherwise, you will progressively become poorer, despite your efforts to save. Secondly, comprehend that tangible assets form the bedrock of genuine wealth. Stocks represent ownership stakes in enterprises that produce goods and services. Real estate provides shelter, a fundamental human requirement. Commodities such as gold serve as physical repositories of value that cannot be arbitrarily created. These assets retain their worth over time because they are intrinsically linked to the tangible world, rather than to governmental assurances. Thirdly, understand that debt functions as a tool that benefits debtors within an inflationary environment. If you procure a loan of $300,000 at a fixed interest rate and inflation averages 5% annually, the real burden of that obligation diminishes by 5% each year. Your $300,000 mortgage will effectively be worth $180,000 in real terms after 10 years of 5% inflation. You borrowed using dollars that possessed greater purchasing power and will repay with dollars that have less. This explains why affluent individuals consistently leverage debt, while the middle class harbors a fear of it. The wealthy grasp that inflation benefits debtors who own appreciating assets. The middle class perceives debt as perilous because they lack appreciating assets to counterbalance their liabilities. Fourthly, acknowledge that the current system is designed to facilitate wealth transfer upwards. When the Federal Reserve introduces new currency into circulation, this money initially enters the economy through financial institutions and large corporations. These entities then acquire assets, thereby inflating their prices. By the time the newly created currency reaches ordinary workers through wages, asset prices have already ascended. You receive dollars with diminished purchasing power. Asset owners conversely acquired those very dollars when they held their full value and utilized them to purchase real assets. This phenomenon is known as the Cantillon effect, and it elucidates the mechanism by which wealth inequality expands with each instance of Federal Reserve currency printing. Fifthly, cultivate skills that hold value in both the historical and contemporary economic paradigms. In the past, Practical competencies such as agriculture, construction, and manufacturing were highly prized. In the modern economy, abstract proficiencies in areas like software development, finance, and marketing are paramount. However, should the contemporary economic structure falter or fragment, practical skills would regain their significance. Possessing a dual skill set enhances your adaptability and resilience. Sixthly, recognize that the prevailing economic system is contingent upon continuous credit expansion and the abundant availability of energy. If credit expansion ceases, the money supply contracts, signaling the onset of a recession. If energy prices escalate, global supply chains become economically unviable, necessitating the reshoring of production and leading to substantial cost increases. The current economic model is optimized for inexpensive energy and plentiful credit. Any alteration to either of these variables can destabilize the entire system. Seventhly, prepare for the possibility of a transition back toward elements of the older economic model. The current fiat currency system has been in place for a mere 54 years, commencing in 1971. This is a negligible duration in historical context, as gold-backed currency systems have persisted for millennia. If confidence in fiat currency erodes, whether through runaway inflation, a currency crisis, or geopolitical fragmentation, the global economic order could revert to commodity-backed currencies or localized production. Maintaining physical assets, acquiring practical skills, and diversifying one's holdings positions you advantageously for such a contingency. The contemporary economy is an intricate construct underpinned by fiat currency, fractional reserve banking, central bank monetary issuance, globalized supply chains, consumer indebtedness, and financialization. While it fosters abundance and efficiency, it concurrently cultivates fragility, inequality, and persistent inflation. Its operational principles are entirely distinct from the previous economic era, which was founded upon commodity-based money, savings-driven investment, localized manufacturing, and strictures on monetary creation. Understanding these fundamental differences not only illuminates the reasons behind rising prices and stagnant wages, but also explicates the very architecture of the world you inhabit. The modern economy necessitates a revised perspective on currency, wealth accumulation, and financial strategy compared to that of your forebears. Their counsel to save money and avoid debt was sound within their economic context. In yours, it leads to impoverishment. In the present economic climate, one must own assets, comprehend the utility of leverage, and acknowledge that currency is a depreciating medium of exchange, not a reliable store of value. This discourse is not intended as financial counsel, but rather as an educational exploration of two fundamentally dissimilar economic systems and their implications for wealth building, risk management, and comprehending the forces shaping your financial circumstances. The economy is not an inscrutable entity beyond comprehension. It is a system governed by specific rules. Once these rules are understood, one can successfully navigate the system, rather than be exploited by its mechanisms.